How did Duke Charles Eugene of Württemberg decide to replenish the treasury with the help of sparrows? Why did the Austrians deliberately destroy the roofs of their castles? Kings can do anything, but no king can hide his income. At least, the British media have no doubt about this. Despite the fact that the Windsor family has been under the microscope all their lives, it was only recently that it became known that monarch Charles III and his son, Prince William, are the owners of 5,500 land plots in the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall. Perhaps for crowned individuals, this is mere pennies. But for example, the British Navy alone is obliged to pay £10,000 a year for access to its own oil storage facility for refuelling ships, since they dock in the Crown's possessions. Because in the kingdom, royal power is provided for. Accordingly, they levy taxes on water, levy taxes on sewage, levy taxes, including on sales, such as excise taxes on alcohol. That is, there, the cost of each bottle reaches up to €1. In total, Charles III and William manage 180,000 hectares of British land. The territories became royal as early as the 11th century, immediately after the Norman conquest. It turned out that these possessions were passed down from one monarch to another by inheritance. The duchies are managed by the company Crown Estate. But this does not mean that there is an order inherent in the English aristocracy. For example, in the Tamar Valley, a mine has been operating for over 100 years, which affects all local residents. But can such a trifle disturb the king himself, especially if it is his personal gold mine? Of course, there is an economic component here, because the Duchy of Cornwall receives hundreds of thousands of pounds annually from a German company that leased this quarry, carries out work there, extracts rare minerals, and, in exchange, pays very, very substantial amounts to the duchy's budget under a simple lease agreement between the lessee and the lessor. The problem is that the Germans are literally tearing the minerals out of the ground. The company still uses explosives as the main tool. It's cheap, effective, and simple. But because of this, the nearest settlements live as if on a powder keg. And it's not possible to take a full breath here. Environmental indicators in the Tamar Valley are close to critical. Despite the fact that this seriously harms both the local population and the environment in general, because this quarry is regularly listed among the largest sources of industrial CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere on the territory of Great Britain. Nevertheless, it continues to operate because, as they say, it's nothing personal, it's business. And the German operating company itself simply points out, refers to the fact that the license for processing was indeed obtained legally. However, the residents of the duchy should be happy that they breathe for free, experts ironically note with bitterness. After all, history knows many examples when monarchs imposed truly absurd taxes on their subjects. For example, the Austrian Emperor Joseph II, who ruled in the 18th century, ordered that everyone must pay, literally, for the roof over their head. Something like a modern property tax. However, it was calculated in a strange way, and therefore the Austrians quickly figured out how to circumvent this law. This was a tax on roofs. At that time, taxes were levied directly on the area of the roof itself, and some people saved themselves by destroying these roofs so that it would be impossible to account for the area. In Austria today, one can still find monuments to the absurd law. Historians call the ancient castles and estates, only partially covered with tiles, by this name. Even after the abolition of the tax, their owners were in no hurry to repair the roof. Who knows what the new emperor might come up with? This is exactly what happened in China with the Tang dynasty. On the one hand, it was during their reign that an incredible cultural and economic upsurge occurred. On the other hand, at what cost? For example, the founder of the dynasty, Li Yuan, introduced a tax on men. The tax itself was formed from payments by males. Moreover, they were, accordingly, obliged to pay based on the number, first of all, of males in the family. That is, the tax burden was distributed in such a way that if you had, let's say, many sons in your family, you were logically more economically successful because the Tang era is still an agrarian period in China's development. Of course, more male labour, more, accordingly, those who work in the fields, not in the household. The financial burden based on gender was also placed on Russian men. We are talking about the famous decree of Peter the Great on the tax on beards, which, in the opinion of the monarch, was considered a terrible archaism. And those who did not want to get rid of facial hair were taxed. However, experts call Peter's law on baths even stranger. Their owners had to pay annually. Top merchants, 3 rubles, less wealthy entrepreneurs, 1 ruble, and peasants, 15 kopecks. However, according to historians, Peter had a good reason for this: the gaping holes in the royal treasury. By 1704, the Russian kingdom was waging the Northern War with Sweden. Military actions, especially combat actions, with the most economically and militarily developed country in Northern Europe at that time, of course, required large budget expenditures. Peter was frankly short of money. Accordingly, Peter begins to look for sources of taxes. Well, wherever he might come up with, to put it bluntly. But the real king of foolish lawmaking, experts consider Duke Charles Eugene. At the end of the 18th century, he ordered the extermination of all sparrows in his possessions. The fact is that the birds pecked at the crops in Württemberg. This is the name of the historical region in the southwest of modern Germany. The year was hungry, and the Duke could not think of anything better than to get rid of the chirping pests. And those who felt sorry for the birds had to pay for their compassion for the feathered creatures. And what is most interesting, it was necessary to always provide evidence of the shooting of these sparrows. That is, at least 12 pieces had to be presented to the authorities, and, accordingly, the authorities paid some subsidies. But in the case where citizens did not provide evidence that they were exterminating the birds, accordingly, an additional tax was levied on them. Today, royal levies, of course, look different. No one shoots at sparrows with cannons anymore. Bolder rulers simply impose huge, unbearable taxes on the population. In this way, the state budget is replenished by Mswati III, the king of the tiny African state of Eswatini. Mswati III is perhaps one of the most eccentric monarchs of our time. We don't have many kings and queens left in the modern world. Monarchy is an outdated form of government. King Mswati loves luxury, and heavy luxury at that. Limousines, private planes. He loves not only luxury, but also the fairer sex. Accordingly, the maintenance of his numerous wives, the maintenance of his even more numerous children from these wives, of course, is fully borne by the budget of the Kingdom of Eswatini. Income tax in Eswatini is 33%. Unlike the Arab Emirates, where Mswati III loves to fly with his daughters and regularly throws parties there, in the UAE, tax on individuals is not levied at all. The state has enough profit from oil exports. Perhaps the residents of Eswatini would be discouraged to learn about such a system, but it's unlikely they would have enough money to travel to the Emirates. Salaries in the African country are meagre, but the king will never tell them about it.